Hey everyone, my name is Matthew Lotz and I'm going to be showing you how to create rocks as game assets in a mixture of ZBrush and Substance Designer. Firstly, I'm going to open up ZBrush and I'm going to start off with the default polysphere. My next move would be to go into geometry and bump up the resolution. Now you can do this one of two ways. You can either click the lower or higher res buttons, but an easier way would just be to divide it a few times. What this will allow you to do is be able to jump between the lower subdivisions and the higher subdivisions to get different kinds of detail in different places. To start sculpting, I'm going to pick out the clay build-up brush. This is a great all-round brush just for different blocking in of shapes and things like that. I'm going to bump up the brush size and then just start going to town on this sphere. I'm not really going for any particular shape here. I'm just trying to get every surface covered on the sphere, so I have no smooth parts remaining from the default sphere. I have symmetry turned on just to speed up the process here, but you can really do this any way you want. I would advise you to cover the whole polysphere just to get an initial grounding of the overall silhouette and the shape of the rock, but as I said, you can go about this any way you want to. The main part we're trying to accomplish here is just to build up a base shape. So if you have a reference or something like that, that's great. I'm just going off my understanding of how a rock should be or how they usually look within the world. Nothing too special about this rock. It's not going to stand out. It's not going to be a centerpiece or anything like that. What I'm doing now is I am holding shift on my keyboard, which will turn the circle blue, your cursor circle blue. This indicates that your alternate brush setting is active. I have my smooth brush active, which, as you saw there, will completely smooth out any imperfections in the geometry. Then once I'm happy with the smoothing result and making sure each side is covered, just rotating that to check, yep, that seems fine. I'm going to go over to my geometry panel and I'm going to increase the subdivision to around 5, back up to 5. This will give me enough polygons to work with in order to apply a surface modifier, which is where this rock will really start to shine. As you can see, the total points once it's bumped up to 5 is just over 11 million. This will actually be our high poly value. As it's a game asset, obviously you can't put an 11 poly object into a world. Well, you can, but it wouldn't be too practical. So we're going to have a high poly and a low poly. But for surface noise, we're going to go down to the surface modifier in the panel, and we're going to check the little noise box to bring up the dialog box. Next, we're going to increase the value of the surface noise all the way up, or you can do it to whichever fits your preference. As you can see, this adds noise to the surface of the rock, creating what I feel is a very convincing rock surface. Has all the little details, imperfections and stuff like that, and you can still sculpt on top of it if you wish to. I'm not really too bothered for this tutorial. I'm just trying to get the point across rather than create a masterpiece here. But yeah, that's fine for me. Seems fine. And from here, what you will do is, if you want to preserve this surface noise, you'll just click Apply to Mesh. You must be on a high subdivision or it just won't save the noise to your object. Well, it will save the noise, but you just won't have that amount of detail there to work with. And once you've applied it to the mesh, if you try to sculpt to it, it will not retain most of the noise. So bear in mind, try to apply the surface noise after you've done your sculpting. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to save out this high poly as an FBX. If you go to Z plugin, it will be FBX export import. All the defaults are usually quite fine for game asset work. What you'll basically do is just click export and save it wherever you want it. I'm going to create a folder here just for this tutorial. I'll just call it rock, I suppose. Go into that folder, just save that. I'm going to save it as rock. but there is a naming convention that you have to keep in mind when working with those sort of things. So I'm going back to ZBrush and I've opened up a pre-made file I had. This is the same technique I used to create that rock. Notice there is some imperfections increasing here. I just wanted to include those in this tutorial just to highlight that even if you aren't the most talented sculptor, or you don't have a tablet, or you don't have the means to create a very nice sculpt, even if there's creasing and overlapping and stuff like that, you can still get a good result. Now here I have a high poly and a low poly. I've done this by saving out both the high poly and the low poly, turning up and down the subdivisions appropriately. As you can see when they overlap here, this is basically what a normal map would bake to. So you have the high poly information that you'll bake down to the low poly information. And something I just really wanted to highlight real quick, when you do export the high poly and the low poly, there is a strict naming convention that Substance Painter really must abide by. So when you save out the high poly, name it whatever you want, and then it has to be underscore high poly, not high poly, underscore high. High being with no capitals, just HIGH. And the same goes for the low, whatever you want, underscore low, LOW, no capitals. And it must be the same naming convention. So if you name your object rock underscore high, the next one has to be rock underscore low. There's no there's no tolerance for errors here. I mean, if it's not named correctly, it will not work within Substance Painter. I just wanted to highlight that real quick just to make you aware, because I know a lot of people do get problems with it, and we can move on now. Let's go. So I'm in Substance Painter and I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to pick no template just because we don't need to. I'm going to load up my low poly. Do not load the high poly, or you'll basically be reversing the process, which is pointless essentially. So I'm going to open up my low poly FBX. I'm going to bump up the document resolution to 2K. You can make it whatever you want. 2K is a nice middle ground between high and low quality. Make sure everything's okay once you import it. The model looks good. Just give it a quick rotate. As you can see, those errors are still there, which I did want to keep in for the sake of posterity. I'm going to first go to texture set on the right and go to bake texture maps. I'm going to uncheck these. Actually, no, we're gonna keep those on. We're just gonna do an initial bake of everything, just so we can get the maps options there. Otherwise, if you go into normal maps, as you can see here, there's no options to even do a bake, so you need to bake all those first. I'm sure there's some you can do without, but I just, for the sake of errors, I'm just gonna bake them all out real quick. Wait for those to bake. Once those are baked, you'll be able to go back into the bake textures page and go up to normal, and you now will have all these options. First of all, I'm going to match the normal map resolution to the project resolution, which is 2K. I'm then going to go into high definition maps. I'm going to click my high poly FBX, and I'm going to change these sliders from 0.001 to 0.3. This will just give me a little bit of extra room to correct for things like errors in the mesh and things like that, and projection. Not hugely important. I mean, you probably won't encounter any errors if you do try to do it without changing that, but that's just something I like to do personally. And as you can see, now that it's baking down, all that detail from the high poly is now applying to the low poly. Wait for that to bake out further, and then we'll get on to a quick and dirty texturing technique. Let's wait for that. Okay. Nope. Something appears to have gone awry here. Oh no, there we go. Okay, now the normal map has been baked. You can save that normal map out if you want to and take it into 3ds Max or Maya or a Blender or wherever you may be using, Modo even. Um, yeah, now if we rotate around this a bit, you can see all that geometry from the high poly has been baked onto that low poly. So essentially what we have here is we have an object, an asset with maybe 8 to 9,000 polygons with essentially the detail of something that has maybe 2 million polygons. And this is highly useful for game design and development because when you're working in stuff like Unity and Unreal, you just don't have those resources there to run multi-million poly objects unless it's ridiculously optimized. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to apply a default copper smart material, change around some of the values, and just have a bit of a fiddle with it until it looks good. I'm going for more of a wet rock environment kind of thing, that's something you'd find next to a river. Take that into the rendering, and here's what I ended up with in the end. I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out just for the sake of this recording, but if you did put a lot more time into it than I did, then you could get something pretty great and you could build up an asset library of different rocks and stuff. So for different projects, you could just pull them in and have them pre-made. You know, that's what I tend to do. I tend to make a bunch of assets in the same category, so rocks, trees, grass, plants, foliage, that kind of thing. I just have separate folders for them, and I like to just drag them into projects rather than starting a project and thinking, oh, I have to do this, 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 and this. Having an asset library makes things so much easier and stuff like that. Once you've rendered out a nice screenshot for yourself, if you really want to, once you're done with Substance Painter and you've got your rock how you want it to look, just save out all those maps. I'm not going to go into how to save maps because it's pretty basic to save out maps. It's just basically save as, and you select all your different bits and stuff like that. I mean, there's tons of tutorials for stuff like that, and I didn't feel it needed to be included. For the sake of the video, I didn't use a tablet. I used a mouse and a keyboard, and I cut out a lot of crashes and things like that. Um, a lot of these videos don't talk about the errors and things like that that they encounter, and it just seems to run flawlessly for them. I'm a normal person, I have a normal computer. I have a lot of crashes when the polygons get into the millions, and I just thought I should include this just in case you're trying to do this and it's just not working for you. Keep trying to tweak things and just work within your limitations, and you will get there eventually. I just wanted to include that for all those people struggling out there. Okay guys, I hope this tutorial helped, and I hope you have a nice day.